Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today, we're time traveling back to 18th century India. But forget about modern India for a second. Picture like a giant chessboard, but instead of squares, it's kingdoms all fighting for power. We're going to untangle the crazy web of regional rivalries and alliances in India.
It's a fascinating period. So much happening, so many players.
Right. And we're focusing on the Marathas. How did they stack up against big names like, the Mughals, the Sikhs?
That's a great
And
question.
our sources are all over the place.
Hmm.
Historical accounts, architecture, even a bit of folklore. Should be a wild ride.
Sounds like it. One thing that always gets me about this era is how we tend to think of empires as these big, unchanging things, but it's just not true.
What do you mean?
Well, these regional powers were like constantly shifting, forming alliances, changing their game plan. It was all about staying on top.
A constant power struggle.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start with the Marathas. They weren't always the big dogs, were they?
No, not initially.
So how did they become so powerful?
Well, there's this legendary figure, Shivaji. He was their warrior king.
Okay, so more than just a tough guy.
Oh, absolutely. Shivaji was a brilliant strategist. He realized the Mughal Empire had weaknesses, even with their fancy armies and cities.
So he found cracks in the armor.
Exactly.
I know the Marathas were masters of guerrilla warfare. Was that Shivaji's influence?
Definitely. They knew the Deccan terrain like the back of their hand, strike fast, disappear into the hills. The Mughals had no idea what hit them.
It's like a classic underdog story.
It really is, and that's how they chipped away at Mughal dominance. And that eventually led to the Maratha Confederacy, which was a really unique political setup.
We'll have to get into that later, I think.
Hmm.
So while the Marathas are shaking things up, the Mughals were also going through some changes, right? And I have to say, their art and architecture is incredible, such a powerful statement.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about beauty. It was about power, blending Persian and Indian styles.
Like those Charbagh gardens,
Yeah.
right? Divided into 4 sections by water.
Yes. But they weren't just pretty gardens. They represented paradise in Islamic tradition.
Wow. A garden as a symbol of paradise?
Yeah.
That's deep.
It is. And then you have the Nine-Bay Tomb Plan,
Right.
which was inspired by Timurid architecture all the way from Central Asia, shows how much the Mughals were plugged into what was happening outside their borders.
It's like they were saying, hey, we're connected, we're global.
Exactly.
And of course, there are the mosques. Huge, grand mosques everywhere. Not just for prayer, right?
Right. They were symbols of power, community centers, strategically placed with towering minarets, a real display of power and piety.
Okay, so we can't talk about Mughals without mentioning Aurangzeb. Now, he was a devout guy, but his approach to building was a little different. He wasn't so into the lavish marble that earlier Mughal emperors loved.
Yeah, he preferred stucco, much less expensive. Maybe it was the economy, or maybe he was making a statement,
Okay.
trying to distance himself from his predecessor's extravagance.
Interesting. But here's the thing. Under Aurangzeb, there was actually a boom in construction.
Yeah, especially among the nobility. It's like they filled the gap when the emperor wasn't spending as much, like Daud Khan's Sarai in Bihar. You know that one.
I don't think so.
Built to protect travelers from bandits.
Wow, so architecture wasn't just about looking impressive. It had a practical side, too. And it shows how power was shifting, right? From
Yeah.
the emperor to the nobles.
Absolutely. These buildings weren't just about looks. They were reflections of the hopes, the fears, the power struggles of the time.
It's like every brick tells a story. Speaking of power struggles, let's talk about the Sikhs. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with in northwest India.
Right. Absolutely. They started as a devotional movement with Guru Nanak, but things changed. They
Yeah.
became more militarized.
Why was that?
Well, their interactions with the Mughals had a lot to do with it. Sometimes they cooperated, sometimes they resisted.
So it was a complicated relationship.
Very complicated. And it shaped their identity and their ambitions. It's actually a story of resilience. They were constantly navigating a tricky political landscape, trying to survive, trying to grow.
So we have the Marathas expanding, the Mughals dealing with internal changes and challenges, and the Sikhs rising in the northwest. It's like a three-way dance. And none of them are staying still.
It's what makes this period so fascinating. Everyone is making strategic moves, trying to outmaneuver each other. It was a real game of strategy and survival.
And betrayals, I bet.
Mhm.
Didn't the Marathas also have to deal with the Nizam of Hyderabad down south?
Oh, yeah. The Nizam was a major player, controlled a huge chunk of the Deccan. He was a mobile governor, but as the empire weakened, he basically said, I'm independent.
Wow, just like that.
Pretty much, he saw an opportunity and took it.
Ambitious. And then there was the Mysore kingdom, right?
Yeah.
With Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan.
Yes. Mysore was another big player in South India. Hyder Ali was a brilliant military leader, always expanding Mysore's territory. He clashed with the Marathas, the British, everyone. And his son, Tipu Sultan, well, he continued that legacy. Became a real thorn in the side of the British East India Company.
Sounds like the Marathas had their work cut out for them, fighting on multiple fronts like that.
They did. And these weren't just straightforward battles. There were alliances, betrayals, constantly shifting allegiances. It was all about survival and expansion, even if it meant turning on a former friend.
A real Game of Thrones. So how did the Marathas handle all this? I mean, their political structure, the Maratha Confederacy, wasn't your typical empire, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was more like a network of semi-independent chiefs, each with their own armies and territories, all technically answering to a central leader.
So like a loose alliance of warlords?
Kind of. It gave them a lot of flexibility. If one chief lost a battle, the others would keep fighting. They were hard to completely defeat.
Resilient, huh? But that sounds like it could cause problems too.
Oh, it definitely did. Too much independence led to infighting and power struggles. It's hard to present a united front when everyone's looking out for themselves.
So their strength could also be their downfall. A double-edged sword.
Exactly, and that internal dynamic would play a big role in their fate, especially with the rising power of the East India Company.
That's another story for another time. But it sounds like we're just getting started with the complexities of this era.
We are. There's so much more to unpack. When we think about these power struggles, it wasn't just on the battlefield or in, political deals. It was everywhere. Even culture and religion were caught up in it.
Really? Give me an example.
Sure. Take languages. As these kingdoms like the Marathas, the Sikhs, the Nizam, all wanted to be their own bosses, you see all these regional languages and literature just exploding.
Oh, so it was a way to express their own identity separate from the Mughals.
Exactly. Sanskrit was the language of the elite, the imperial court. But these kingdoms, they were like, nope, we're going to do our own thing.
That's so cool. It's like a cultural revolution.
Yeah. And then you have the Bhakti movement, devotional Hinduism. It was massive. People from all walks of life devoted to gods like Vishnu and Shiva.
All right, right. I remember learning about that.
It wasn't just a religious thing either. It had a huge social and political impact. All these saints and poets writing devotional songs in regional languages, it really strengthened those local traditions.
So religion could be like a double-edged sword. It could unite people, but it could also be used to divide them.
Totally. Rulers knew that religion was a powerful tool. They used symbols, they gave patronage to religious institutions, all to make themselves look legit and appeal to certain groups.
It's all about winning hearts and minds, not just territory.
Precisely. And this mix of religion, culture, and power, it's everywhere in Indian history. It reminds us that power isn't just about armies and brute force. It's about controlling the narrative, building loyalty.
Okay, so we talked about Mughal architecture. But other powers were building impressive stuff too, right? Not just the Mughals.
Absolutely. The Marathas, for example, built some amazing forts, especially those hill forts high up on cliffs and mountains.
Yeah.
Strategically brilliant, and they looked incredible.
I bet. Easy to defend.
Oh, yeah. They were tough to crack. Fortifications, secret passages, even clever ways to manage water. They were like the ultimate symbol of Maratha resilience.
Like a big middle finger to the Mughals. We're here to stay.
Basically. And these forts, they weren't just military bases. They were centers of administration, cultural hubs, religious centers.
So architecture becomes a way to tell your story, project an image. It's powerful.
It is. And when we look closely at the choices they made, the styles, the materials, the symbols, it tells us so much about their ambitions, their influences, their relationships with other powers.
It's like these buildings are whispering secrets to us about the past.
I love that. And by listening carefully, we can piece together a much richer understanding of what was going on.
Okay, but all this talk about empires and kingdoms and alliances, it's fascinating. But how does it relate to, us today? Why should we care about these events from centuries ago?
That's a really important question. I think one big takeaway from this era is understanding that political power, it's never absolute. It's never set in stone. Empires rise, empires fall, kingdoms break apart, they come back together, alliances change, all the time.
So it's a constant reminder that things are always in flux.
Exactly. And I think that's an important lesson for today's world. Whether we're talking about global politics, local issues, even our personal relationships, realizing that power dynamics are fluid is super important.
So history isn't just about memorizing dates and names. It's about developing a more sophisticated understanding of how the world works.
Exactly. It's about learning from the past to navigate the present, to understand the forces that shape our world.
Okay, so back to the Marathas. We've talked about their military skills, their political structure, their architecture. But they eventually declined, right? What happened?
Well, remember all that independence among the Maratha chiefs. It was a double-edged sword. Internal power struggles and conflicts, they really weakened them.
So their own strengths became their weakness.
Yeah, pretty much. And then there were some major military defeats. The Third Battle of Panipat in 1761 was a turning point. They lost big time, lost territory, lost prestige.
Ouch, that's gotta hurt.
Yeah, and it all contributed to their decline. It's a classic example of how not being united can really hurt you, especially when you're facing powerful enemies.
Makes sense.
Okay.
So all these empires and kingdoms and alliances, it's a lot to take in. But I'm curious, what was life like for everyday people during all this? Not just the kings and generals, but the regular folks.
That's a great question. It can be tricky to find information about the lives of ordinary people. The historical records tend to focus on the elite, but we can still learn a lot from regional literature, from folklore, from archaeology.
So it's like a detective story, piecing together clues to get a glimpse of their lives.
Yeah, and what we find is that their lives were deeply affected by all this political stuff, shifting borders, changing trade routes, new technologies. It all impacted their jobs, their social structures, their culture.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, think about the growth of cities. More trade, more urbanization, more people moving from rural areas to cities. This created opportunities for some, but it also led to social tensions as different groups competed for resources and space.
It's like a microcosm of the bigger power struggles, but playing out on a smaller scale within these cities.
Exactly. But this mixing of people also led to incredible cultural exchange and innovation. New ideas, new art forms, new ways of life emerged from this melting pot.
So it wasn't all doom and gloom. There was progress and creativity happening too.
Absolutely. And those cultural developments often had a lasting impact, shaping the identity of these communities long after the political conflicts were over.
So we shouldn't just focus on the big battles and the powerful rulers. The everyday lives of people were just as important. They shaped history too.
Couldn't agree more. By exploring their stories, we get a much richer and more complete understanding of the past.
Okay, back to the Mughals and the Sikhs for a second. We mentioned their relationship was complicated. It wasn't always fighting, right?
Right. It was a roller coaster, honestly. Sometimes they were allies, sometimes enemies. It was influenced by politics, religion, even personal relationships.
It sounds exhausting.
It probably was. But the Sikh community's transformation from a devotional movement to a powerful military force, it was largely a reaction to the Mughals.
So the Mughals basically shaped the Sikhs' identity.
In a lot of ways, yes. The Mughals saw them as both potential allies and potential threats. They had great military skills, they controlled important territory in Punjab. That made them useful allies. But their growing power, their distinct religious beliefs, it also worried the Mughals.
It's like a balancing act.
Yeah.
Trying to control them, but also needing their help.
Exactly. And as the Mughal Empire weakened, the Sikhs got bolder. The balancing act got harder and harder.
So what were some of the, key moments in their relationship? The good times and the bad times?
Well, during Akbar's reign, things were pretty good. Akbar was known for his tolerance, remember? He granted land to the Sikhs for their holiest shrine, the Golden Temple at Amritsar. He got along with several of the Sikh gurus.
So Akbar was trying to build bridges, not burn them.
Exactly. But that peace didn't last forever. When Jahangir took over, things changed. He executed Guru Arjan Dev, the fifth Sikh guru.
Oh, wow. Why?
It's complicated, but it was a huge turning point. It really pushed the Sikhs to become more militarized and fueled their resentment towards the Mughals.
Talk about unintended consequences.
Right. That one execution really changed everything. It brought the Sikhs together, gave them a stronger sense of identity, and made them even more determined to resist the Mughals.
So from a peaceful movement to a force to be reckoned with, that's a pretty dramatic shift.
It is. And under Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th Guru, they really transformed into a powerful military force. They established their own system of governance, the Khalsa, and adopted a strict code of conduct.
So they weren't just fighting, they were building their own society. their own nation almost.
Exactly. The Sikh kingdom, centered in Punjab, became a major player in the 18th century. They made alliances, they fought wars, they really shaped the political landscape of India.
It's amazing to think about, how this community that started as a devotional movement ended up becoming a powerful kingdom.
It's a testament to their strength, their adaptability, and their unwavering belief in their faith and their community.
So throughout this era, it seems like both external pressures and internal dynamics played a role in the rise and fall of these empires and kingdoms. It's rarely a simple case of one power conquering another.
You're absolutely right. Power is rarely just about brute force. It's about a million different factors all coming together.
It's like a giant puzzle,
Right.
right? With all these different pieces that fit together in unexpected ways.
Perfect analogy. And you have to look at all the pieces, not just the obvious ones.
Okay, so can you give us some examples of how those external pressures and internal dynamics work together?
Sure, let's take the Mughal Empire, the big guys. By the 18th century, they were in decline. Why? Well, on the one hand, you have all these regional powers like the Marathas and the Sikhs challenging their authority.
So they were getting squeezed from all sides.
Exactly. And to make matters worse, they had their own internal problems. Succession disputes, weak leadership, financial troubles. All of that weakened them from the inside.
So basically, they were getting hit from both outside and inside.
Exactly. And that's what led to their decline. They couldn't keep up with the changing times. It's a reminder that even the most powerful empires can crumble if they don't adapt and address their weaknesses.
A cautionary tale for any leader, right? Don't get complacent.
Exactly. It's not enough to just be powerful. You have to be smart, you have to be flexible, and you have to keep your own house in order.
Okay, so we've talked about all this fragmentation, all these different powers emerging, but was there any sense of unity? Did anyone try to bring everyone together during this chaotic time?
That's a good question. There wasn't one single unifying force, but there were definitely some attempts at alliances and collaboration. Sometimes it was about shared interests, sometimes cultural connections, sometimes religious ties.
It's like pockets of unity in a fragmented world.
Exactly. Remember Akbar? He was all about religious tolerance and bringing people together. He supported scholars and artists from different backgrounds. He really tried to build bridges between Hindus and Muslims.
It's like he was ahead of his time.
In many ways, he was. He envisioned a more inclusive and tolerant empire. And while he didn't achieve everything he set out to do, his efforts had a big impact.
It's inspiring to think about, Even in the middle of all this conflict, there were people who were trying to bring people together.
It's a good reminder that peace and unity are always possible, even in the most challenging times.
Okay, but we can't ignore the elephant in the room, right? The growing influence of the Europeans, specifically the East India Company. They were up to something, weren't they?
Oh, they were definitely up to something. They started as a trading company, but they had bigger ambitions. As the Mughals weakened and all these regional powers were fighting, the East India Company saw an opportunity.
To take over.
Well, not right away. They were clever. They played different groups against each other, made alliances, exploited the chaos, and they had a big advantage. Superior weapons and tons of money.
So they were playing the long game, divide and conquer.
Exactly, and it worked. They slowly but surely expanded their control and influence.
It's crazy to think about how this one trading company ended up having such a huge impact on India's future.
It is. And it all goes back to what we've been talking about. Power dynamics, alliances, internal divisions, and external forces. It's a complicated story.
Well, that's a story for another deep dive, isn't it?
Definitely. But it's a story that's connected to everything we've been discussing today.
Okay, so let's take a step back and think about this for a second. We've been talking about kings, generals, merchants, priests. But what about the women? Where were they in all of this?
That's a fantastic question. For a long time, history tended to ignore women, But thankfully, that's changing. Historians are digging deeper, looking for those hidden stories.
Because they were there, living through these events, shaping their families and communities, even if they weren't always in the spotlight.
Absolutely. It can be tough to find information about them, but we can look at court records, literature, religious texts, even archaeology. It's like putting together a puzzle, finding those missing pieces.
And what do we find when we start looking for those missing pieces?
We find that women played all sorts of roles. In royal families, they were mothers, wives, advisors. They influenced politics, diplomacy, even military decisions.
So they were more than just pretty faces. They were powerful players in their own right.
Exactly. They shaped events from behind the scenes, wielded power in subtle ways. And it wasn't just the elite women either. Women were active in trade, in religion, in the arts. They were the backbone of their communities.
Can you give us an example of a woman who really made a difference during this time?
Sure, there's Tarabai. She was the wife of Shivaji's grandson, Shahu, and when her husband died, guess what? She took charge of the Maratha Confederacy.
Wow, so she became the ruler.
Yep. She was a strong leader. She defended the Marathas against the Mughals. She made decisions. She led armies. She negotiated treaties.
She sounds
She
amazing.
was. And her story shows us that women were capable of so much more than traditional history books might tell us. There were many other women like her, their stories just waiting to be rediscovered.
It's like there's a whole hidden history just waiting to be uncovered.
Exactly. And the more we uncover it, the richer our understanding of the past becomes.
Okay, let's zoom out for a minute and look at the bigger picture. One thing that really stands out to me is the incredible diversity of political systems. You had empires, kingdoms, sultanates, confederacies. It's mind-boggling.
It really was a unique time, and that diversity was shaped by so many factors.
Hmm.
India's long history, its varied geography, its complex social structures.
Okay, break it down for me. How did those factors contribute to this crazy political landscape?
Well, first, India rarely stayed unified for long. Empires rose and fell, kingdoms split apart, new powers popped up all the time. It was like a constant cycle of change and adaptation.
So change was the only constant.
Pretty much. And then you have geography.
Mhm.
India has vast plains, huge mountains, dense forests, long coastlines. Each region developed its own culture, its own language, its own economy. And that often led to the formation of separate political entities.
It's like geography created natural barriers, and those barriers led to political fragmentation.
Exactly. And those geographic features also influenced military strategy, trade rights, where people settled. Everything was connected.
Okay, so history, geography. What about society? How did social structures play a role?
Oh, huge role. India had a complex caste system, diverse religious communities, tons of local customs and traditions, and all of that played into politics. Different groups formed their own factions, made their own alliances.
So it's like a giant tapestry with all these threads woven together. History, geography, society, religion, culture.
Exactly. And understanding how those threads connect is key to understanding India's political evolution.
So it's not just about studying maps and treaties. It's about understanding people, their beliefs, their identities, their relationships with power. It's about the human story.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, before we wrap up, I want to go back to the idea of the cyclical nature of power. We keep seeing empires rise and fall, alliances shift and betray. It's almost like there's a pattern, like power is always in motion.
You're absolutely right. Power is never permanent. It's like a river, constantly flowing, changing its course.
So it's not about clinging to power. It's about understanding its nature. It's about knowing that it can be gained, it can be lost, and it can be used for good or for evil.
And that's why studying history is so crucial. We can learn from those who came before us, both their successes and their failures. We can understand how power dynamics work and use that knowledge to make better decisions.
So history can be a guide, a roadmap for navigating the complexities of power.
Exactly. By understanding the past, we can understand the present, and hopefully we can create a better future.
Okay, one last thing before we move on. We talked about the interplay of culture, religion, and politics. Can you give us some more concrete examples of how those forces interacted during this era?
Sure, let's look at the Bhakti movement again. It was this massive wave of devotional Hinduism that spread throughout India. But it wasn't just a religious movement, it was also a cultural and political force.
How so?
Well, all those saints and poets who wrote devotional songs in regional languages, they really boosted those languages and challenged the dominance of Sanskrit, the language of the elite.
So a religious movement could also spark a cultural and linguistic revolution.
Exactly. And that cultural shift had political consequences. Regional identities got stronger, and that played into political alliances and power struggles.
It's like everything was interconnected. You can't separate religion from culture from politics.
Exactly. They all influence each other. And we see it in the architecture, too. Building temples, mosques, shrines. It wasn't just about religious devotion. It was about power, legitimacy, making a statement.
Right, like those massive Mughal mosques we talked about. They were definitely about more than just prayer.
Totally. They were symbols of power, designed to awe and inspire. And by looking at those buildings, by understanding the choices they made in their design and construction, we can learn so much about the society that built them.
It's like every brick tells a story.
I love that. It's
Yeah.
about looking beyond the surface and uncovering those deeper meanings.
Okay, one final theme I want to explore. The tension between centralization and decentralization. We see these powerful empires trying to control everything, but then you have all these regional powers, local communities, and religious groups pushing back and demanding autonomy.
It's a classic struggle, right? The desire for unity versus the desire for freedom and independence.
It's like a tug-of-war that's been going on forever.
Exactly. And the balance is always shifting depending on all sorts of factors.
Wait, give me some examples of how that played out in this era.
Well, the Maratha Confederacy is a great example of decentralization. They were able to resist the Mughals precisely because they weren't a centralized empire. They were more like a loose alliance of chiefs.
So their strength came from their flexibility and independence.
Yeah.
But we also talked about how that could lead to internal problems.
Right. It made them hard to conquer, but also hard to unite. And that tension between unity and fragmentation played out in religion, too. The rise of devotional Hinduism, where people connect directly with the divine, it kind of bypassed the traditional religious hierarchies.
So a religious movement could also be a decentralized force.
Absolutely. It empowered individuals and challenged the established order.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to come back to our original question. Why should we care about these events from centuries ago? What makes this era relevant to our lives today?
Well, I think the biggest lesson is that power is never absolute or static. It's always changing, always being negotiated and contested.
So we have to be adaptable, right? We can't cling to old ways of doing things. We have to be willing to change and evolve.
Exactly. And studying history helps us see those patterns, those cycles of power, and understand how to navigate them. It can help us make better decisions, whether we're talking about politics, business, or even our personal lives.
So history isn't just about dusty old books and boring facts. It's about understanding the human story and learning from it.
Absolutely. It's about connecting the past to the present and using that knowledge to create a better future.
It's about connecting the past to the present and using that knowledge to create a better future.
Exactly. It's about connecting the past to the present and using that knowledge to create a better future.
Well said. It feels like we've only just scratched the surface of this era, but for now I think we need to wrap up our deep dive into these regional rivalries and alliances in India.
It's been an incredible journey, and I hope our listeners now have a deeper appreciation for the complexity and the enduring relevance of this period in Indian history.
I'm sure they do. And I'm already excited for our next deep dive where we'll uncover another fascinating chapter of history.
Until then, may your curiosity continue to guide you.
That's a wrap for today's deep dive.